What's up, everyone? It's Adar coming at you with another episode of Startup Engineering Daily. Let's hop right into it. So our first tweet is from Guillermo from Vercel, announcing that they have a new skill they're working on to migrate Create React App to Next.js. They're looking for apps to test it with. And he says here something that is fascinating, which is pretty confident agent skills can help solve one of the most annoying problems in computer science, legacy software migrations. I find this interesting because there's a piece to it that we'll talk about in a later story, but there is a lot of benefit of this old stuff that engineers don't want to do, keeping the creative part human and giving all the legacy migration stuff. Database migrations maybe are not as safe that you can execute with AI, but in terms of code that's sandboxed and will be going through human PR review, it does make a lot of sense to be like, okay, for example, with Convex, right? Like I have a bunch of backends where I have TRPC, for example, or even just Next API routes, and I want to switch those to Convex because you get all the real-time stuff without having to use a WebSocket service or a real-time service. I actually have an AWS API gateway WebSocket set up for one of them, and it does work well, and AI actually kind of improved the reliability of that as well. But even then, I still want to move to Convex, right? And I'm like, well, in the pre-AI days, that's like a 6-week process potentially to move everything over to Convex, and you have to do a ton of testing, you have to do a huge data migration, and it's very scary and almost like never worth it, You just want to stick on the infrastructure that's reliable, and it's actually kind of problematic if people are coming in and saying, oh, we should migrate everything over to this new solution without like really, really good reasons. And real time may not be a good enough reason, for example. But now, in the age of AI, it makes a lot more sense potentially to do these big migrations and see, and even like do a proof of concept overnight, for example, of like, here's what it would look like to do the migration, and even have like a pilot version going, while you're keeping the old one going, and all of these different things that are like best practices that we've thought about before, but are now implementable in these small teams. Next, we have another tweet from Guillermo, just a kind of internal product release or demo that he's showing where they have this thing called @D0, I guess in Slack. They can say how many users opted into the new dashboard experience and stayed opted in. And they said they were trying to build the Jarvis of data, but now they're doing Opus 4.5 plus Vercel Sandbox plus Vercel Gateway has made it possible. I'm not exactly sure where Vercel Sandbox would be here. I guess it would be like asking about the code, right? And having Git repos cloned makes a lot of sense using Vercel Sandbox for that, which is like kind of isolated containers that you can have file systems. We talked about how they now support snapshots, so you don't even have to run Git clone multiple times. You can just have multiple sandboxes with the same file system snapshot that you recreate. And then Vercel Gateway is kind of their open router competitor where you can just use one API token and get access to all of the models. And there was I remember there was news about how when Anthropic had an outage on Claude, Vercel Gateway actually transferred all of that traffic over to Bedrock Claude from AWS, and they kind of stopped an outage on behalf of Anthropic for Vercel Gateway users. So pretty cool stack to investigate. I haven't used Vercel Sandbox. I've used Cloudflare Sandbox, and it works pretty well, but apparently Vercel Sandbox is like kind of the older, more mature one, so definitely something to look into. So next we have a tweet from shadcn. It's a pretty basic update, but there's a principle within here that I thought was fascinating. Kind of talked about it previously in Guillermo's tweet where he was talking about how AI makes it easier to migrate legacy systems. So shadcn's announcing that they've updated the inline start and inline end styles across several base UI components, which is cool, but they said no update script or code mod this time. We're giving you a prompt to let your LLMs do the work. And I feel like that's kind of weird because the code mods, right, are like deterministic. So it's like for certain things that are like changing styles like this, right? I'm sure it would be interesting to see, like, do LLMs succeed 100% of the time to the point that it is deterministic for a style change, especially if you're giving it to like Opus 4.5, that it will always successfully change it. But I just feel like for changes like this, you want to leverage the AI to actually create the code mod that gives you the deterministic code, So it's like one layer up, but it's interesting that they're just giving an LLM prompt and saying, hey, run this and it'll effectively work as a code mod. And I guess it's just like if there's any issues or you're using a poor model, or like I think someone said in the replies, like if you don't have access to these LLMs, then it's a bit problematic. But I don't know if I agree with this perspective of like, here's a prompt to do a code mod update or a migration if you can do a code mod. If it is deterministic, keep it in code, but if it's not, give it to the LLMs is kind of my take on how to use these tools. Next, we have Rahul from Ramp. I guess he's head of applied AI. And he says that 41.9% of PRs merged to master on their back-end and front-end repos came from Ramp Inspect in the last week, which is their kind of AI agent that they have internally. They've used to build some cool tools like an Excel analyzer, and they also built like Roller Coaster Tycoon, I believe, with Claude using Inspect. So it's kind of a cool internal agent. They've been flexing it. You know, they have tons of money to throw at things like this, especially this new tech that's just becoming so popular, the agent kind of wave. But it is interesting because we are coming into a world where AI is writing most of the code that we're doing, if not all of it. And essentially the bottleneck is becoming human code review, because you kind of want to have this accountability and this liability avoidance with merging code. And kind of like the Nick Dobos tweet we talked about a couple days ago, where 99% of the time PR review is pointless, but 1% of the time it can avoid catastrophic issues or $1 million lost or the company dying. So I would be very interested if Rahul could expand on this and be like, what is the review system that they go through? Do they go back and forth? I saw with CodeRabbit on one of our projects that I was essentially using AI to fix the comment that it gave and then reply to it using the GitHub API to reply to the comment that CodeRabbit gave. And then CodeRabbit actually replied back that it had checked and that the issue was fixed. So that is definitely more towards the futuristic idea, I believe, of going back and forth within these PRs. And you have that human piece, and that speaks to like Devin and Linear's takes on the code review product and kind of competing with GitHub on that. But it'll be interesting to see moving forward. And I do want more people to talk about their process with code review from a human perspective, because it is one of those things where the big companies back in the day, like Google, etc., they already had all of these principles built in, but startups kind of had to avoid them for the sake of velocity. But now with the power of AI writing all the code, we can focus on these more meta tasks that are really important to making sure everyone's mental model is on the same page, the code is clean. So our last story is from Eli Russo, I guess that's how you say his name, who is building the product Rams.ai, kind of, I think, inspired by Dieter Rams, the designer. And essentially what it is an agent that is really focused on design and accessibility and all of that, and 80 plus checks for accessibility tokens and AI slop. So I think there's a skill that's publicly available, which is the one with 12,000 installs that he's saying here. And then they also have the agent and the CI/CD that's in private beta that you can apply for. And it seems cool. I haven't seen too many products built with it. I think it's still kind of new, but kind of in the Twitter hype cycle. But definitely there's still some problems. You do have to prompt the models in a certain way to make sure they design UI that's modern and not kind of like ugly. I personally don't mind like the linear quote unquote like slop designs. Like I think the old school designs that Opus can achieve don't look bad, even though they are kind of like becoming AI slop per se. But there is like another level to it of like, what do the next generation UIs look like, you know? And it's definitely just becoming more and more interactive, more and more convenient is obviously the direction we're going towards. But if you're interested in those kind of things, you can check out this skill at rams.ai. This kind of stuff interests you and you want to talk with some like-minded people, join the Audinato Discord in the description. Thanks.